of me! How dare you interfere!
Stop it, Mother.
I will not let you do this. That is enough.
Marcus Vale had closed billion-dollar deals without ever raising his voice. But the moment he heard his mother shouting at a maid in the east corridor of the family mansion, he crossed the marble floor like a man chasing a memory he had spent half his life trying to outrun. He arrived just in time to see Evelyn Vale standing beneath a crystal chandelier with one hand lifted, her diamonds flashing as sharply as her anger. A silver tray trembled in the maid's hands. A porcelain cup lay shattered across the floor. Relatives in formal clothes lingered a few steps away, pretending to be offended by the scene, while refusing to miss a single word. "I asked you a simple question," Evelyn said, each syllable clipped and cold. "Why were you standing near that hallway?" She was young, African-American, dressed in a plain black uniform with a white collar. And although fear showed clearly in her face, it was not the fear of someone guilty. It was the fear of someone who had walked too close to something hidden and realized too late that the people around her had been guarding it for years. Marcus followed her gaze and felt an old chill rise in him. At the far end of the corridor stood the narrow walnut door that had remained locked for as long as he could remember. As a child, he had once reached for that handle and been stopped so sharply that even adulthood had failed to soften the memory. Never touch that door again. Not tomorrow, not ever. Now his mother stood in front of that old silence, like a woman protecting more than wood and brass. The quartet in the ballroom beyond the archway faltered. A cousin lowered his champagne glass. One aunt slowly turned away, and then, realizing nobody else had the decency to pretend, turned back again. Marcus stepped between Evelyn and the maid without asking for details first. "Whatever this is," he said quietly, "you will not handle it like this." Evelyn's expression hardened. "You came home early." "And you seem busy." Marcus turned to the maid. "What's your name?" She swallowed. "Lena Hart, sir." Lena opened her mouth, but instead of explaining herself, she lifted one trembling hand and pointed past his shoulder, straight at the locked room. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it changed the temperature of the entire corridor. "Sir, please don't ask me what happened to me." Her eyes stayed fixed on the door. "Ask them why that room has been locked for so many years." The silence that followed was so complete, Marcus could hear the grandfather clock in the next hall marking each second like a warning. Marcus turned slowly toward the door, and something old and buried shifted inside him. He remembered almost nothing clearly about the room. That was part of what made it so disturbing. It lived inside him like a torn page from a book he had once loved. He remembered blue pajamas, bare feet on cold floors, a line of light under a door, a silver melody from the other side. He remembered wanting to go in. He remembered being stopped. The words landed with impossible force. Marcus had not thought about a music box in years. Yet in the instant she said it, 3 descending notes and 1 rising note flashed through his mind so vividly that he almost felt dizzy. Evelyn snapped, "This is absurd!" But the denial came too fast, too polished. Marcus looked from his mother to the locked room and back again. He had spent years building a reputation for calm intelligence, for never reacting before he understood the full shape of a problem. But this was not business. This was a hallway in the house where he had grown up feeling provided for, and somehow still emotionally homeless. When the corridor had emptied, only Marcus, Evelyn, and Lena remained, with the locked room at the end of the hall like a witness that had finally been called to testify. Evelyn folded her arms. "You are creating drama where there is none. It was part of the old nursery wing. It was sealed years ago. That is all." Marcus held her gaze. "Then why does a maid looking at it upset you this much?" "Because this is my house." "No," he said. "That answer used to work when I was 8. The sentence struck harder than he intended. He saw it in the way her expression changed, not dramatically, just enough. Alarm, memory, fear. Lena lowered her eyes, but Marcus had already noticed the tears gathered there. "I shouldn't have stopped," she said softly. "I was taking tea to the terrace, but when I passed the hall, I heard the melody, and I knew I was standing in front of the right door. The right door." "Come to my father's study in 10 minutes, he told her. Evelyn took a step forward. "Marcus." Then he turned and walked toward the west wing without asking anyone for permission. Because there are moments when a son stops behaving like a son and becomes the only adult in the room. The study had not changed since Theodore Vale died. Dark shelves, leather chairs, a brass lamp angled over a desk, still so carefully arranged it felt less like furniture and more like preserved performance. Evelyn had always called it respect. Marcus had quietly suspected it was guilt. Marcus had almost skipped the event entirely. That was the truth beneath the tuxedo and polished smile. He respected the company, protected the family name, signed the charitable checks, funded the museum wing his mother wanted, attended the galas. But emotionally, he had never fully come home. Not to this mansion, not to the people in it. He had learned early that comfort and closeness were not the same thing. The mansion looked magnificent from the outside. Inside, it had always felt curated rather than warm. And somewhere inside that perfection was a locked room no one could mention without panic. When Lena entered, she closed the study door softly behind her and remained standing. Marcus gestured toward the chair across from the desk. "Sit." She shook her head. "If I sit down, I might not be able to say this." "Then stand and say it." A faint, sad smile touched her face. "You sound like him." Marcus straightened. "My father?" She nodded. He stared at her. "You have exactly one chance not to make that sentence a mistake." Marcus frowned. "What is that?" "Something that belongs to the room." She reached into the hidden seam of her apron and placed a small velvet pouch on the desk. He untied the cord. A brass key slid into his palm. Old, tarnished, its head shaped like a star. The sight of it hit him so hard he had to brace one hand against the desk. He knew the key. Not in the clear way of memory, but in the deep physical way the body remembers long after the mind has been instructed to forget. He could almost feel smaller fingers turning it. Could almost hear a woman's voice telling him gently, "Slow hands, Marcus. It only sings when you're gentle." He looked up sharply. "Who?" "I have to." Her eyes filled, but she did not retreat. "I'm not deciding what you're allowed to hear. I'm trying to keep you from hearing it in the wrong order." Marcus said nothing. "If I tell you everything first," Lena continued, "you will hear accusation. If you see the room first, you may hear love." "Told by whom?" Again his patience tightened. But all she said was, "Someone who loved you enough to leave." Marcus had spent years disguising certain injuries as discipline. Powerful men learned to do that. They learned to call loneliness focus, distance maturity, grief efficiency. But that sentence touched the oldest wound in him, the one he never named aloud. The suspicion that at some point in his childhood, someone essential had gone away, and no one had thought he deserved the truth. "Give me something real," he said. Lena nodded and took out a photograph. Beside him knelt Theodore Vale, smiling faintly. And at the edge of the frame, nearly cut away, was the arm and hand of a woman kneeling toward the boy. In her hand was a silver music box. Marcus stared at the photograph until the room seemed to narrow around it. Someone had deliberately trimmed that image to remove her face. "Who is she?" he asked. Lena's throat moved. "That," she said, "is the question your mother has spent years trying to make impossible." When his turn came to speak, he rose slowly with a glass in hand and looked out over the room full of polished faces waiting to be reassured. "A family," he said, "is often judged by what it builds in public. But sometimes its true character is hidden in the things it refuses to remember." A small silence followed. People smiled uncertainly. Marcus raised his glass anyway. "To truth, however late it arrives." He drank and sat. His mother did not. After dessert, while the guests drifted toward the terrace, Marcus went to the archive room on the second floor. If there was one lesson Theodore Vale had given him that business school had never improved upon, it was this: when a story feels polished, inspect the records. The archive room held household ledgers, renovation plans, staff files, event books, correspondence logs. Most people found it dull. Marcus found it honest. He unlocked the cabinets and began with the years surrounding his earliest memories. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Payroll records, floral orders, repairs, catering invoices, seasonal maintenance. Then the year he turned 7 began to fracture. The guest log skipped an entire summer. Under the black strokes he could still make it out. Aurelia Ray. Not temporary caregiver. Not household staff reassigned. A name. He wrote it down just as the archive room door opened. She shut the door behind her. "Whatever that girl told you, it is incomplete." Evelyn moved to the far side of the table and rested 2 fingers on the ledger without opening it. "The room at the end of the east corridor belonged to a woman who worked here when you were very young." "A caregiver." "A nanny?" Marcus slid the note with Aurelia Ray written on it across the table. What was her name? For the first time that night, Evelyn's face changed in a way she could not fully control. Not denial. She became too attached. To me? She forgot her place. Marcus's jaw tightened. Or maybe the problem was that I remembered it. A flash of anger crossed her face. "You were a child. You do not understand the pressure your father and I were under." "Did father know her well?" Marcus leaned forward. "And what exactly did she do?" Evelyn answered too quickly. "Nothing criminal, nothing dramatic, but she made this house impossible." That was when Marcus understood 2 things at once. First, his mother was still protecting something bigger than reputation. Second, she was no longer telling the same story twice in the same way. "The records are missing because of her," he said. "No, the records are missing because some seasons deserve silence." He almost laughed at the honesty hidden inside the lie. She was no longer denying the burial, only defending it. "She called Aurelia a caregiver," Marcus said. Lena closed her eyes. That was her favorite way to make love sound replaceable. Marcus stared. You know her? Yes. How? She opened her eyes again, and there it was at last, the first piece of truth offered without strategy. The sentence moved through him like distant thunder. Aurelia Ray raised me in Savannah, Lena said. She died 2 years ago. Before she died, she gave me the key, the photograph, and a letter. She told me that one day I would need to come here, no matter how long it took, and make sure you opened that room yourself. Why me? Because the truth inside it belongs to your childhood. That doesn't answer the question. Her voice dropped. She said there was one thing you must never keep believing, that you had been easy to leave. He turned away so she would not see how directly the sentence struck. Why didn't she come herself? Because by the time she was ready, she was too ill, Lena said. And because she knew this house would not welcome her while the past remained locked inside it. I opened the room tonight, he said. Lena shook her head. Not while the house is full. Not while your mother can turn it into a scene before it becomes the truth. Marcus looked down at the little brass key in his hand. She doesn't control this anymore. She controlled it for years. Don't underestimate what people can destroy when panic reaches them before honesty does. Marcus hated that she was right. Marcus dismissed everyone from the East Wing except Lena. Then he walked the corridor with her at his side. The house felt different at night, stripped of performance. Portraits watched in silence. The runners softened their steps. At the end of the hall, the locked door waited exactly as it had in memory, narrow and ordinary-looking enough to seem harmless if you did not know how hard people had worked to keep it closed. Lena pointed to the carved molding near the baseboard. She said the real lock was hidden. He knelt and ran his fingers along the wood until he found a tiny indentation shaped like a star. His pulse climbed. He slid it into the slot. Marcus stood, turned the handle, and opened the door. The room inhaled time. Cedar, dust, lavender long faded but not gone. Moonlight stretched across the floor through sheer curtains silvered by rain. A rocking chair beside a lamp table. A child's bookshelf with worn storybooks arranged by size. A low rug with a wooden train on one side. And on a small table near the window, a silver music box shaped like a little house with a midnight blue roof. Marcus stepped inside as though entering a chapel, built for a forgotten version of himself. He crossed first to the wall of drawings. One showed a tall man in a black suit with the word "Daddy" written beneath it in a child's uncertain hand. For Marcus, from Aurelia Ray. Marcus stared until the sounds of rain and breathing grew distant. Aurelia Ray. He could almost hear himself saying it in a child's voice, turning an adult name into something soft enough to belong only to them. When he wound it, the melody drifted into the room like memory given shape. He saw himself on the rug in striped pajamas while Aurelia tucked the quilt around his shoulders and Theodore leaned in the doorway, smiling. He heard a story about a train conductor who never lost his way because he listened for the right bell. He felt a warm hand smoothing his hair. And suddenly, the air around him was no longer empty. Voices. Evelyn at the door, brittle with contained emotion. Theodore saying, "He needs peace." Mama Rhea.
The memory broke so sharply Marcus nearly dropped the music box. Confidential household agreements. Theodore's signature. Marcus's throat tightened. They exiled her. They called it protection, Lena said. He opened the letters next. Then the letters changed. Shorter, more formal. Written from Savannah. Updates without warmth allowed to show too openly. He broke the seal. The room around you belonged to the woman who gave you the safest years of your childhood. Her name is Aurelia Ray. You called her Rhea. She entered this house as an employee, but no truthful person could leave the story there. When your mother became seriously unwell after your birth, Aurelia stepped into the hours that frightened us most. She held you when Evelyn could not, soothed you when I was absent, and built ordinary peace in a house that knew more about status than tenderness. Your mother loved you. That is true. It is also true that love can become distorted when shame enters it. Evelyn saw how easily you rested with Aurelia and began to experience that comfort as a judgment on everything she was struggling to be. Aurelia was not only your caregiver, she was your mother's younger sister. Marcus stopped breathing for a second. He forced himself to continue.
She asked only one thing of me, that one day you would know she had not left because you were unwanted. I failed that promise for too long. Love, Father. Not every detail, she said, crying openly now. But enough. How? Lena took out another envelope. She left this for you too, but only after the room opened. He knew it before he unfolded the page. If this reaches you, then the door has finally opened, and silence no longer owns the room where you once learned to sleep without fear. I left because the house had become full of wounded pride, and I could not bear for you to grow inside that storm. Your mother was hurting in ways no one named honestly. Your father was trying to hold peace together with arrangements. I chose absence because it seemed kinder than letting you become the rope in a struggle between sisters. That choice broke me, but I would still make any sacrifice that kept your childhood from turning cruel. Please do not turn your pain into contempt. Truth matters. So does mercy. If you learn what was hidden, hold both. Not because he had missed the meaning, but because for the first time in his life, a message from his childhood had reached him unedited. Marcus stood there with Theodore's confession in one hand and Raya's letter in the other, and for a long moment the room seemed to divide his life into two clean halves. In one half was the world that had made him, the immaculate dinners, the polished speeches, the expensive schools, the boardrooms where nobody ever trembled, the mansion where every flower arrangement was perfect and every emotion arrived dressed for inspection. In the other half was this hidden room, with its worn rug, its soft quilt, its patient music box, and the undeniable evidence that somewhere, before power taught him how to stay composed, love had once taught him how to feel safe. That realization hurt more than any accusation could have, because it showed him exactly what had been stolen. Not his inheritance, not his future. The thing taken from him had been simpler and far more precious. The right to remember the person who had made childhood gentler. He understood then why his mother had feared the room, why his father had delayed the truth, and why Lena had come into the house wearing a uniform instead of a claim.
The room did not contain scandal. It contained comparison. It proved that tenderness had lived inside the family once, in a form no title, no marriage, and no fortune could command. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. Marcus knew who it would be before he turned. Evelyn stood in the doorway, looking past him into the room she had sealed from sight for decades. Moonlight cut across her face. Whatever authority she had worn at the gala was gone. In its place was the terrible nakedness of a person standing before the evidence of what she had done and what she had lost. "She should have burned that letter," Evelyn said, though her voice held no strength. Marcus rose, Aurelia's page in one hand and Theodore's in the other. "She was your sister." Evelyn closed her eyes. "Yes." "Why erase the records?" Evelyn stepped inside slowly, as if the floor itself might reject her. "Because every time I saw her with you," she said, "I saw what I could not do without effort. She made care look natural. I made it look planned. And after you were born, when my mind went dark and everyone expected gratitude, Aurelia stepped in quietly and saved more than one of us. She never humiliated me. That almost made it worse." Tears filled her eyes, but she kept talking, perhaps because there was no point in stopping now. "You reached for her before you reached for me. At first I told myself it was temporary. Then I saw how your whole body changed when she entered a room. You relaxed. You laughed. You slept. I began to feel like a guest in my own motherhood." He wanted anger. What came instead was grief sharpened by comprehension. "The night you called her Mama Raya," Evelyn went on, looking at the rocking chair, "I felt something collapse inside me. Not because you had done anything wrong. You were innocent. But I heard, in one sentence, every fear I had buried since your birth." Marcus looked at her and finally understood that his mother had not spent all these years guarding a scandal. She had been guarding a shame too intimate to confess. That jealousy had once been stronger in her than gratitude, and once acted upon, that jealousy had built a prison around the whole family. "She said, wounded people can do terrible things without becoming monsters. She refused to let me come here seeking revenge." Evelyn covered her mouth and turned away, shoulders trembling. He turned to Lena. "Why come as a maid?" She let out a shaky breath. "Because if I arrived with letters and claims, your mother would never let me near you. But wealthy houses see uniforms before they see people. Aurelia understood that. She said truth enters proud homes quietly if it wants to get close enough to be heard." The opening scene flashed through Marcus with new force. The tray, the shouting, Lena's silence, the corridor. She had not come into the house to ask for rescue. She had come carrying history in the only form the house would overlook. Another memory surfaced, clearer than the rest. He was lying beneath the blue and gold quilt, while Aurelia told him that brave conductors always keep one light burning for travelers who feel lost. The pendant had glowed against her dress every time she leaned over to wind the music box. "Aurelia left this to me," Lena said, "with instructions that if you remembered the train story, I should tell you the last truth." Lena's hands shook as she closed her fingers around the pendant. "After Aurelia left this house, she went to Savannah and lived in the cottage your father purchased through the trust. A year later, a cousin of hers died, leaving behind a little girl. Me. Aurelia raised me as her own, but before she died, she told me something she had never written down. She said the reason she protected your mother's dignity for so long was because on the night she left, Evelyn begged her for one final mercy. She asked Aurelia not to tell you the full truth while she was alive, because she wanted one more chance to become the mother she had failed to be. His mother was crying without hiding it now. I waited, Evelyn whispered. And then I kept waiting, because every year that passed made confession harder. I told myself I would speak after the next birthday, the next success, the next loss, the next moment that felt stable enough. Then your father died, and the lie became the architecture of everything. But the possibility of understanding how ordinary weakness, protected long enough, becomes legacy. He walked to the bookshelf and ran a finger across the spines. Stories Aurelia must have read to him, stories his mother had locked away because they hurt. When he turned back, his voice carried the calm that made boardrooms listen. No more locks, no more erased names, no more hidden letters. He looked around the room. Aurelia goes back into the family record, publicly, truthfully. Evelyn closed her eyes, then nodded once, slowly, like a woman accepting a sentence she had written herself years ago. Marcus turned to Lena. And you do not leave this house through the service entrance. He looked at the letters on the desk, then back at her. I'm creating something in Aurelia's name. A foundation for caregivers, especially women whose labor holds families together while history only remembers the people with titles. Housing support, legal aid, mental health services, scholarships. Not performative charity, real structure. Then he faced his mother. You can help if you are willing to tell the truth and live with what follows, not manage it. Tell it. Evelyn wiped her face with trembling fingers. I don't know if I deserve to stand inside her memory. That is not for you to decide alone anymore, Marcus said. But silence is over. The three of them spent the rest of the night carrying boxes, letters, and drawings into Theodore's study so they could be cataloged properly. No servants, no attorneys, no publicists. Just family history, finally handled by human hands instead of buried by legal ones. Evelyn stood for a long time with the blue and gold quilt in her arms, pressing her palm against the stitched fabric as if it might still hold her sister's warmth. When morning light entered the east corridor, the mansion no longer felt immaculate. A week later, Marcus shocked the board, the press, and most of the city by postponing the glamorous anniversary campaign everyone had prepared for months. In its place, he released a statement announcing the Aurelia Ray Foundation, created to honor a woman whose care had shaped his life and whose name should never have been removed from his family's story. And at the first press conference, he asked Lena Hart to stand beside him not as staff, but as founding director. Reporters expected scandal. They expected betrayal, inheritance disputes, or some cruel twist fit for gossip. What they got instead was rarer. A powerful man admitting that the most valuable thing taken from him had not been money, but truth, and that the woman who returned it had entered his house carrying a silver tray because pride had left no other door open. But later that evening, when the cameras were gone and the house was quiet, Marcus saw her walk alone into the Rhea room. From the doorway, he watched her stop in front of the drawing on the wall. He watched her touch the frame with trembling fingers. Then she wound the silver music box herself. When the melody began, Evelyn sat in the rocking chair and finally wept, not like a matriarch losing control, but like a sister who had spent too many years guarding the ruins of her own mistake. Months later, the foundation opened its first residence in Savannah, in the restored home where Aurelia had raised Lena. The porch rails were painted soft blue. Lemon trees lined the path. In the entryway stood a framed photograph of Aurelia Ray smiling in a gold scarf, and beneath it, a brass plaque carried the words Marcus chose from her letter. On opening day, caregivers, donors, and families filled the garden with laughter. Lena spoke first, her voice clear and steady. Marcus spoke after her about dignity, memory, and the invisible labor that teaches children what safety feels like.
Evelyn came too, quietly, without demanding attention, and stood near the back, holding a single white flower she eventually placed beneath Aurelia's portrait. At the close of the ceremony, Marcus stepped to a small table where the silver music box rested beneath glass. He lifted the cover, took out the star-shaped key, and wound it gently. For one aching, beautiful second, he was 7 again, waiting beneath a quilt for a story about trains and courage. But this time, the memory did not vanish when he reached for it. It remained, not locked behind someone else's shame. He looked at Lena, who smiled back through shining eyes. He looked at his mother, whose face now held sorrow and humility in equal measure. Then he looked at the children running between the lemon trees, laughing without fear, and understood at last why Lena had pointed toward the locked room instead of defending herself in the corridor that night. The mansion still stood in Brookshire. Vale Holdings still expanded. Marcus Vale was still a billionaire, still respected, still powerful enough to bend markets with a signature. But none of that became the most important inheritance of his life. His real inheritance was waiting behind a locked walnut door in the East Corridor, preserved by guilt, guarded by fear, and returned at last by a young maid who had never come to be rescued. And when that door finally opened, Marcus discovered that the mystery hidden at the center of his family was not a crime, not a scandal, not a servant wrongly blamed.